The scorching Arizona sun cast elongated shadows across the cracked highway leading into Ironwood Junction, a modest desert town long forgotten by maps and tourists alike. Once a bustling stopover for travelers and long-haul truckers, Ironwood had become little more than a dusty relic of the past. The desert was both ruthless and beautiful, red sandstone cliffs looming like ancient sentinels, tumbleweeds dancing across the barren land, and a sky so wide it seemed to swallow everything in its embrace. At the heart of this sleepy settlement stood the Iron Spur Saloon, an unassuming roadhouse with a weather-worn wooden sign swinging creakily in the hot breeze. Once a lively honky-tonk, the neon lights on the sign flickered erratically at night, casting a pale glow over the dusty lot where pickups and motorcycles occasionally rumbled in for a cold drink. Locals still gathered at the Iron Spur most nights, sharing hushed stories over whiskey and beer, their conversations blending with the scratchy melodies from an old jukebox in the corner. Behind the bar was Cassie Rowe, a woman of few words and even fewer smiles. She blended easily into the backdrop of the saloon, worn jeans, faded button-ups, scuffed boots. Her auburn hair was often tied back in a practical ponytail, and her light brown eyes held an unreadable depth. To most, Cassie was just the quiet bartender, serving drinks and offering a listening ear without asking questions. But there were those who suspected there was more to her story, something hidden beneath the surface like an unexploded mine waiting to detonate. They were right. Cassie had once been Sergeant Cassandra Rowe of the elite Delta Force, a soldier who had seen the worst of humanity in countless dark corners of the world. She'd walked away from that life 5 years ago, searching for something resembling peace. She found Ironwood Junction instead, bought the saloon with cash and little explanation, fixed it up with her own 2 hands, and kept mostly to herself. The townsfolk, content with their own secrets, didn't pry. But peace, as Cassie knew too well, was a fragile thing. Whispers on the wind. For months, rumors had circulated about a biker gang known as the Dead Coyotes. Stories of their brutality drifted from town to town. Extortion, intimidation, and outright violence. They rolled through other small desert towns, taking whatever they wanted and leaving fear in their wake. People in Ironwood Junction said it was only a matter of time before they came this way. Cassie noticed a change in the air before anyone else. It was subtle, the way the regulars hunched lower over their drinks, the way laughter was forced, the uneasy glances at strangers who pulled into town on noisy bikes. She saw it all, and every time the Dead Coyotes' name was mentioned, she felt the same old tightening in her gut. Like muscle memory, her body prepared for a fight before her mind could even process it. One sweltering afternoon, the quiet of Ironwood was shattered. A convoy of motorcycles thundered down Main Street, their engines snarling like wild animals. Locals peeked through blinds as the bikers parked in front of the Iron Spur Saloon, dust swirling around them like a warning. Cassie stood behind the bar, polishing a glass as she watched them through the cracked window. She counted 8 riders, each one wearing the Dead Coyotes patch, a snarling skull framed by ragged wings. The leader was easy to spot, a tall man with sun-bleached hair and mirrored sunglasses that reflected everything and nothing. His name, whispered later by Pearl the waitress, was Jax Cutter. They came in heavy boots and road-worn leathers, their presence like an oil slick on water. They laughed too loud, drank too much, and threw their weight around like they owned the place. But Cassie watched, and she waited. She served them drinks, exchanged pleasantries with clipped words, and memorized every move they made. Jax eyed her with amusement. "You don't talk much," he said, his voice lazy but with an edge of steel. "Not much to say," Cassie replied. He smiled like a predator, sizing up its next meal. "We'll see about that." Lines in the sand. Over the next few days, Ironwood Junction changed. The Dead Coyotes didn't leave. They prowled the streets, leaning on businesses for protection money, vandalizing storefronts, and making it clear who was in charge now. Sheriff Dale, the closest thing the town had to law enforcement, did little to stop them. Understaffed, underfunded, and overmatched, He warned Cassie to keep her head down. But Cassie had never been good at keeping her head down when innocents were threatened. One night, Pearl showed up at the saloon with bruises on her arms. She said one of the Coyotes didn't like being told no. Cassie's expression didn't change, but the next morning, she drove out past the old quarry where the Coyotes had set up camp. She watched from a ridge, memorized their patterns, their shifts, their numbers. She cataloged their weaknesses the way she used to on missions half a world away. The time for waiting was over. Ghosts of War. Cassie opened her old footlocker for the first time in years. Inside was the life she thought she'd buried. A customized M1911, a Remington 870 shotgun, a combat knife with a worn leather grip, and a radio set to frequencies only a few people still knew about. She sent a message, might need a favor. Same old story. The reply came hours later. On my way. The next evening, a black SUV rolled into Ironwood Junction. The man who stepped out was all angles and shadows. His name was Dean Walker, call sign Hawk. Once a sniper in her unit, now a freelance security consultant. His gaze swept the town like a laser sight. You look like hell, he said. You should see the other guy, Cassie replied. They shook hands like soldiers do. Brief, firm, full of things left unsaid. Raising the stakes. With Hawk's help, Cassie mapped the Coyotes' movements in and around Ironwood. They weren't just thugs. They were organized. They had supply lines, caches of weapons, and a plan. Ironwood was just their latest conquest. But Cassie had a plan too. They started small. Slashed tires. Sugar in gas tanks. Quiet sabotage that slowed the Coyotes down and sowed paranoia in their ranks. They fed intelligence to Dale, who finally found the courage to deputize a few locals. They armed the ranchers and shopkeepers who were tired of living in fear. Cassie taught them how to defend their town. Hawk showed them how to shoot straight and stay calm under fire. But she kept the most dangerous tasks for herself. The breaking point. Jack Cutter didn't like losing control. When he realized someone was working against him, he retaliated. Hard. The Coyotes firebombed the Iron Spur Saloon. Cassie and Hawk managed to get everyone out before the flames consumed the building, but the message was clear. Leave or die. But Cassie wasn't leaving. The next morning, as smoke still curled from the blackened ruins of the saloon, she stood in the middle of Main Street with her shotgun slung across her shoulder. Hawk stood at her side, his sniper rifle ready. And behind them, the people of Ironwood Junction. Farmers, mechanics, teachers, even Pearl, bruises fading but her spirit unbroken. They were armed, scared, and angry. But they stood their ground. Jax and the Coyotes roared into town, expecting fear. They found a fight. The last stand. The battle for Ironwood Junction was brutal. Gunfire cracked across the desert like thunder. Cassie moved like a ghost through the streets. She knew better than anyone. Hawk picked off Coyotes from rooftops, his shots precise and final. The townsfolk, emboldened by their leaders, held the line at the old church and the gas station. Cassie faced Jax in the ruins of the saloon where it had all started. They fought with fists, knives, and finally their bare hands. He was strong and cruel, but she was trained and relentless. When it was over, Jax lay unconscious at her feet, and the Coyotes were in retreat. Aftermath. Sheriff Dale took Jax and the few surviving Coyotes into custody. State police arrived days later, drawn by reports of gunfire and armed standoffs. They found a town that had defended itself, unwilling to be victims. The Iron Spur Saloon was rebuilt, brick by brick, by the same hands that had defended it. Cassie stood behind the bar once more, serving drinks with the same quiet strength as before. But now, people looked at her differently. With respect, with gratitude. Hawk stayed for a while before moving on. Before he left, he told her, "You ever need me again, you call." "I will," Cassie said. And she meant it. Epilogue. Ironwood Junction healed slowly, like a broken bone resetting itself. The scars remained, but so did the pride. Cassie still ran the Iron Spur, but she was no longer just a quiet bartender. She was their protector, their shield. And if trouble ever came knocking again, she'd be ready. Because once she was dealt a force. And some things never fade.